On a sweltering August afternoon in downtown Phoenix, 32-year-old Rebecca Martinez was rushing to pick up her 6-year-old daughter from summer camp when she witnessed something that stopped her dead in her tracks. An elderly gentleman stood frozen at the edge of Camelback Road, one of the city's busiest intersections, his weathered hands gripping a worn leather briefcase as traffic thundered past him in both directions. She had exactly 7 minutes to collect Emma before the camp's late pickup fees kicked in. Fees she absolutely couldn't afford. But something about the man's desperate expression made her forget about time, money, and everything else weighing on her shoulders. What Rebecca didn't know was that this split-second decision to help a stranger would set in motion a chain of events that would transform her family's life in ways she never could have imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca Martinez had learned to carry burdens that would crush most people, and she did it with a smile that never quite reached her tired brown eyes. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., her alarm clock would pierce through the thin walls of their cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the south side of Phoenix, jolting her from whatever restless sleep she'd managed to steal between worrying about bills and planning the next day's impossibly tight schedule. The apartment itself told the story of their circumstances without words. The living room furniture consisted of a hand-me-down couch from her sister, its floral pattern faded from years of use, and a coffee table she'd found abandoned by a dumpster and sanded down herself. The kitchen barely had room for 2 people to stand, with mismatched cabinets that never quite closed properly and a refrigerator that hummed so loudly it sometimes woke Emma in the middle of the night. Rebecca had tried to make their small space feel like home, with Emma's artwork covering the refrigerator door and cheerful yellow curtains she'd sewn from clearance fabric. But the water stains on the ceiling and the perpetual scent of the neighbors' cooking reminded them daily that this wasn't where they'd planned to be. Emma's father, David, had disappeared from their lives 3 years earlier, leaving behind nothing but empty promises and a pile of debts that Rebecca was still working to pay off. She'd discovered his gambling problem too late, long after their joint credit cards had been maxed out and their savings account had been drained. The divorce papers had been finalized 18 months ago, but David had never paid a cent of the court-ordered child support. Rebecca's lawyer had explained that tracking down someone who didn't want to be found, especially someone who worked cash jobs and moved frequently, was like chasing smoke. Her morning routine was a carefully choreographed dance of efficiency born from necessity. While her coffee brewed in the second-hand machine that only worked if you jiggled the handle just right, she would lay out Emma's clothes for the day, pack her lunch with whatever groceries they had on hand, and review her own schedule scribbled on a calendar that was more wishes than reality. Rebecca worked 3 different jobs to keep their heads above water, each one paying just enough to make her ineligible for most assistance programs, but not nearly enough to provide real security. Her primary job was as a medical billing specialist at Desert Valley Medical Center, where she spent 8 hours a day in a windowless office, entering insurance codes and fighting with insurance companies over coverage disputes. The work was mind-numbing but steady, providing their health insurance and a predictable paycheck that covered exactly 2/3 of their monthly expenses. Her supervisor, Mrs. Patterson, was a stern woman in her 50s who seemed to take personal offense at any sign of the outside world intruding into the workplace. When Emma had been sick with strep throat last month, Rebecca had been forced to take 2 unpaid days off, and Mrs. Patterson had made it clear that such absences were noted in employee files. 3 evenings a week, Rebecca rushed from the medical center to her second job at Sunrise Diner, a 24-hour restaurant that smelled permanently of bacon grease and industrial coffee. She worked the dinner shift, serving truckers, night shift workers, and insomniacs who ordered the same meals she'd served hundreds of times before. The work was physically exhausting. Her feet ached constantly from standing on the worn linoleum floors, and she'd developed a permanent crease in her brow from squinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. But the tips were decent, especially on weekends, and the kitchen manager sometimes let her take home leftover bread and soup at the end of her shift. Her third source of income came from weekend house cleaning jobs she'd found through a neighborhood app. Rebecca would spend her Saturdays scrubbing bathrooms and organizing closets in houses that were larger than her entire apartment building. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was intimately familiar with the granite countertops and walk-in closets of families who probably spent more on their monthly housekeeping than she made in total. But the work paid cash, which meant she could immediately buy groceries or put gas in her ancient Honda Civic without waiting for a check to clear. The Honda itself was a source of constant anxiety. Rebecca had bought it 5 years ago, with 180,000 miles already on the odometer, and every strange noise it made sent her heart racing. She'd learned to perform basic maintenance herself from YouTube videos, changing the oil in the apartment complex's parking lot, and keeping a container of engine coolant in her trunk. The air conditioning had died 2 summers ago, and she'd never been able to afford the repair. During Phoenix's brutal summer months, she and Emma would arrive at their destinations with their hair plastered to their heads with sweat, but Rebecca had learned to keep a small cooler with ice water in the back seat and a battery-powered fan that plugged into the cigarette lighter. Emma's needs came first, always. Rebecca had mastered the art of shopping clearance racks and thrift stores, finding name-brand clothes for her daughter while wearing her own outfits until they literally fell apart. Emma's backpack was new each school year, even if it meant Rebecca ate ramen noodles for lunch for 2 weeks to afford it. When Emma had begged for ballet lessons like her classmates, Rebecca had found a community center program that offered sliding scale fees and worked an extra cleaning job to cover the cost. She attended every school event, every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game, somehow juggling her work schedule to be present for the moments that mattered to her daughter. The financial pressure was relentless and exhausting. Rebecca kept a notebook where she tracked every penny, planning their expenses down to the dollar and constantly shifting money between categories like a financial chess game. Groceries. 1 week might mean skipping her lunch money at work the next. Emma's school supplies might mean postponing the Honda's oil change for another month. The electric bill might mean choosing the cheapest generic cereal instead of the brand Emma preferred. Every purchase required calculation, every decision carried consequences, and every month felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss of debt and desperation. But perhaps the hardest part wasn't the financial struggle, it was the loneliness. Rebecca had lost touch with most of her friends after Emma was born. Partly because she couldn't afford to join them for dinners out or weekend trips, and partly because their conversations about career advancement and vacation plans felt like they were speaking different languages. Her sister lived in Portland and called occasionally, usually to offer advice that sounded helpful in theory but impossible to implement in practice. Rebecca's parents had both passed away within 2 years of each other when Emma was a toddler, leaving behind more funeral debt than inheritance. The other single mothers she'd met through Emma's school seemed to be in similar situations, all of them too busy surviving to form the kind of friendships that might have provided emotional support. They exchanged sympathetic smiles during school pickup and sometimes shared information about sales or job openings, but everyone was running their own race against time and poverty. Rebecca often wondered if Emma sensed the weight of their circumstances, despite her efforts to shield her daughter from the adult worries that kept her awake at night. Sleep had become a luxury Rebecca couldn't afford. After Emma went to bed each night, Rebecca would spread her work uniforms across the couch, planning the next day's complicated schedule. She'd update her job applications on her ancient laptop, its screen flickering and fan whirring loud enough to wake the neighbors. She'd studied online courses in medical coding, hoping to qualify for higher-paying positions, but the certification exams cost more than she could spare. She'd researched nursing programs and paralegal courses, creating elaborate plans for a better future that always seemed to require more time and money than she possessed. The irony was that Rebecca had never expected this life. She'd graduated from Arizona State University with a degree in business administration and had spent her early 20s working for a marketing firm in Scottsdale. She'd met David at a friend's wedding, and he'd seemed stable and ambitious, working in construction management and talking about buying a house and starting a family. They'd married after 2 years of dating, and Emma had arrived exactly when they'd planned. For a brief, shining moment, Rebecca had felt like she was living the life she'd always imagined, until David's carefully hidden problems began to surface and their carefully constructed future crumbled around them. Now, at 32, Rebecca felt decades older than her age. The stress had left permanent lines around her eyes and silver threads in her dark hair that she couldn't afford to color. Her hands were rough from cleaning chemicals and dishwater, and her back ached constantly from bending over tables at the diner. But she pushed forward because Emma needed her to, because giving up wasn't an option, and because somewhere deep inside she still believed that hard work and determination would eventually pay off. The traffic light at Camelback Road and Central Avenue was notoriously long, and Rebecca found herself drumming her fingers on the steering wheel as she watched the minutes tick by on her phone. Emma's camp charged $5 for every 10 minutes parents were late, and those fees added up quickly. She'd already been late twice this month, once when her shift at the medical center had run over due to a computer crash, and once when the Honda had refused to start until she'd sweet-talked it for 15 minutes in the parking lot of the diner. As she sat in traffic, Rebecca's mind wandered to the conversation she'd had with Emma that morning over breakfast. Her daughter had mentioned that some of her camp friends were going to Disneyland with their families, and she'd asked innocently if they could go too someday. Rebecca had smiled and said, maybe next year, the same response she gave to most of Emma's requests for things beyond their reach. She wondered how many more years she could use that phrase before Emma stopped believing it, before her daughter realized that maybe next year was just another way of saying probably never. The light finally turned green, and Rebecca pressed the gas pedal, her ancient Honda responding with its familiar wheeze and rumble. She had exactly 4 minutes to reach the camp before the late fees kicked in, and she knew from experience that the afternoon traffic on Central Avenue moved at a crawl. She switched lanes, hoping to gain a few seconds, when she spotted him, an elderly man standing at the edge of the crosswalk, looking confused and frightened as cars rushed past him in both directions. Something about his posture, the way he clutched his briefcase against his chest like a shield, reminded her of her father in his final years. Her dad had been proud and independent right up until the end, refusing help even when his arthritis made simple tasks nearly impossible. Rebecca had learned to offer assistance in ways that preserve his dignity, and she recognized that same stubborn pride in the stranger's weathered face. The clock on her dashboard showed 3:57 p.m. Emma's camp ended at 4 p.m. sharp. The late fees would start at 4:01 p.m., and Rebecca's bank account couldn't absorb another unexpected expense. But as she watched the elderly man take a tentative step toward the street and then retreat as a city bus thundered past, she realized she couldn't drive by. Not today. Not ever. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Rebecca pulled her Honda to the curb, her heart pounding as she watched the elderly man through her windshield. The afternoon sun blazed down mercilessly, and she could see beads of sweat forming on his forehead as he stood frozen at the intersection. His grey suit looked expensive but outdated, the kind of formal attire that suggested he came from a different generation, one where men dressed up for important appointments, regardless of the weather. She glanced at her phone again. 3:58 p.m., 2 minutes before Emma's camp ended, and she was still 6 blocks away. The late fees would be automatic. The camp director, Ms. Rodriguez, had been crystal clear about their policy. No exceptions, no sob stories, just $5 for every 10-minute increment. Rebecca had already paid $20 in late fees this month, money that could have bought Emma's favorite cereal and a carton of milk. The elderly man took another hesitant step toward the crosswalk, his leather briefcase swaying in his grip. A delivery truck roared past, its engine backfiring with a sound like a gunshot, and the man stumbled backward, nearly losing his balance. That's when Rebecca noticed the hearing aid in his left ear and the slight tremor in his hands that had nothing to do with nervousness. Her father had developed that same tremor in his 70s, a condition the doctors had never been able to fully explain. It had made him drop things, coffee cups, his reading glasses, the keys to his truck. But he'd been too proud to admit the problem, insisting he was fine even when Rebecca found him cleaning up broken dishes in his kitchen. This stranger had that same proud bearing, the same stubborn set to his shoulders that said he'd rather struggle alone than ask for help. Rebecca turned off her engine and stepped out into the oppressive heat. The asphalt radiated warmth through the thin soles of her work shoes, and she could feel sweat immediately beginning to form under her medical center uniform. The fabric clung uncomfortably to her back as she approached the crosswalk, her mind racing with calculations. If she helped him quickly, maybe she could still make it to Emma's camp on time. Maybe the traffic would cooperate. Maybe she could find a parking spot right outside the building. Maybe the camp director would be running late herself. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, raising her voice to compete with the traffic noise. "Would you like some help getting across?" The man turned toward her, and Rebecca saw his face clearly for the first time. He appeared to be in his late 70s, with kind blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses that had slipped down his nose. His hair was completely white, carefully combed despite the wind, and his face was weathered in a way that spoke of decades spent outdoors. There was something distinguished about him, an old-fashioned dignity that reminded her of the black-and-white photographs of her grandfather. "Oh, my dear," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't quite place. "I don't want to be a bother. I'm just having a bit of trouble with the timing of these lights. They seem to change so quickly these days." Rebecca smiled, recognizing the familiar pride in his tone. "It's no bother at all. I'm Rebecca, and I'd be happy to walk with you. Where are you headed?" "Harold Whitfield," he replied, adjusting his grip on the briefcase handle. "I have an appointment at the First National Building just across the street and down about 2 blocks. I used to make this walk every day for 40 years, but I'll admit the traffic has gotten a bit more intimidating than I remember." The First National Building was one of the oldest skyscrapers in downtown Phoenix, a beautiful Art Deco structure that had been converted into office spaces and professional suites. Rebecca had cleaned offices there once, marveling at the marble, floors, and ornate elevator doors that spoke of a more elegant era. It was exactly the kind of place where a man like Harold would have business. "Well then, Mr. Whitfield, let's get you there safely," Rebecca said, offering him her arm. She tried to ignore the persistent ticking of time in her head. 3:59 p.m. now, 1 minute until Emma's camp ended. But looking at Harold's grateful expression, she realized she couldn't have made any other choice. The pedestrian signal finally changed, and they stepped off the curb together. Harold moved slowly but steadily, his cane tapping against the pavement. In a rhythm that spoke of long practice, Rebecca matched his pace, creating a small bubble of calm in the chaos of downtown traffic. She could smell his cologne, something classic and understated, mixed with the scent of leather from his well-worn briefcase. "You're very kind to help an old man," Harold said as they reached the halfway point of the crosswalk. "Not many people stop these days. Everyone's always in such a hurry." Rebecca thought about her own hurry, about Emma waiting at camp, and the fees that were probably already accumulating on her account. But she pushed those thoughts aside. "My father always taught me that we're all in this together," she replied. "Besides, Phoenix summers are tough enough without having to navigate them alone." A city bus rumbled past them, close enough that Rebecca could feel the heat from its engine and the whoosh of displaced air. Harold gripped her arm tighter, and she could feel the slight tremor in his fingers through the fabric of her uniform. Sleeve. She wondered how many times he'd attempted this crossing alone, how many times he'd been forced to retreat to the safety of the sidewalk when the traffic became too overwhelming. They reached the other side of Camelback Road, and Harold paused to catch his breath in the shade of a towering palm tree. The First National building rose before them, its limestone facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. Rebecca could see the brass plaques near the entrance, listing the various law firms, accounting offices and consulting companies that occupied the upper floors. "Thank you so much, my dear," Harold said, reaching into his jacket pocket. For a moment, Rebecca thought he was going to offer her money, and she prepared to politely decline. Instead, he pulled out a small appointment card and checked the time. On his vintage pocket watch. "I have a meeting with my attorney at 4:15, and thanks to you, I'll actually be on time." Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text message. Emma's camp director. "Hi, Rebecca. Emma is ready for pickup. Please remember our late fee policy." The message was polite but firm, and Rebecca felt her stomach clench with familiar anxiety. It was 4:02 p.m., and she was still 20 minutes away from the camp, even if traffic cooperated, but Harold was looking at her with such genuine gratitude that she couldn't bring herself to rush away. "I'm glad I could help," she said sincerely. "Will you be okay getting home later?" "Oh yes, my grandson is picking me up at 5:30. Harold replied, his face brightening at the mention of family. "He's always after me to take taxis or use those ride-sharing apps, but I've been walking these streets since before he was born. Sometimes a man needs to prove to himself that he's still capable, you know?" Rebecca understood that feeling completely. She'd been proving her own capability every day for the past 3 years, juggling jobs and responsibilities that would have broken someone with less determination. But she also understood the wisdom in accepting help when it was offered, something her own pride had been slow to learn. "Well, please be careful," she said, squeezing his arm gently. "And don't hesitate to ask for help if you need it. There are good people in this city." Harold smiled, and for a moment his eyes crinkled in a way that transformed his entire face. "Indeed there are, my dear. Indeed there are. You've restored an old man's faith in humanity today." As Rebecca hurried back to her car, she felt a strange warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the oppressive Phoenix heat. Yes, she would have to pay the late fees at Emma's camp. Yes, her carefully planned budget would be thrown off once again. But somehow, helping Harold had felt like the most important thing she'd done all week. She drove through the afternoon traffic with a lighter heart, even as her phone continued to buzz with increasingly urgent messages from the camp director. When she finally arrived at Sunshine Day Camp 23 minutes late, she apologized profusely and handed over $15 in late fees without complaint. Emma bounded out of the building with her usual enthusiasm, chattering about the friendship bracelets she'd made and the games they'd played in the pool. "Why were you late, Mommy?" Emma asked as they walked to the car. "Ms. Rodriguez looked kinda mad." Rebecca helped her daughter into the back seat and buckled her seatbelt, choosing her words carefully. "I stopped to help someone who needed assistance," she said simply. "Sometimes being kind is more important than being on time." Emma nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to her 6-year-old mind. Like when I helped Sophia find her lost toy at camp. Exactly like that, sweetheart, Rebecca replied, meeting her daughter's eyes in the rearview mirror. Helping others is always the right choice, even when it costs us something. As they drove home through the desert heat, Rebecca reflected on the encounter with Harold. She would probably never see him again, but for a few minutes she'd made a difference in someone's day, in a life filled with endless struggles and financial pressures. That simple act of kindness felt like a victory worth celebrating. The week that followed Rebecca's encounter with Harold Whitfield unfolded with the same relentless rhythm that had defined her life for the past 3 years. Monday brought a double shift at the medical center when a co-worker called in sick, leaving Rebecca to process insurance claims until nearly midnight. Tuesday meant rushing from her day job to the diner, where she served coffee and comfort food to night shift workers, while her feet screamed in protest against the unforgiving floors. Wednesday through Friday blurred together in a haze of medical codes, dirty dishes, and Emma's bedtime stories read through exhausted eyes. But something had shifted inside Rebecca since that sweltering afternoon downtown. The memory of Harold's grateful smile seemed to surface at unexpected moments, when she was dealing with a particularly difficult insurance company representative, when a rude customer at the diner complained about his lukewarm coffee, when Emma's teacher sent home yet another fundraising flyer for activities they couldn't afford. Instead of feeling the familiar surge of bitterness or self-pity, Rebecca found herself thinking about the simple act of extending kindness to a stranger. Emma had absorbed the lesson in her own 6-year-old way, becoming more attentive to opportunities to help others. At the grocery store, she insisted on returning an elderly woman's dropped coupon. During camp pickup, she helped a younger child find his missing water bottle. These small gestures seemed to energize her daughter in a way that surprised Rebecca, as if Emma had discovered a secret source of joy that didn't require money or expensive toys. "Mommy, do you think that nice man made it to his meeting okay?" Emma asked on Thursday evening as Rebecca tucked her into bed. The apartment's air conditioning unit wheezed and struggled against the desert heat, but Emma seemed comfortable enough under her lightweight summer blanket covered in cartoon unicorns. Rebecca smoothed her daughter's dark hair, so similar to her own. "I'm sure he did, sweetheart. Sometimes all people need is a little help to get where they're going." "Maybe we'll see him again someday," Emma said, with the hopeful certainty that only children possess. "I'd like to ask him if he has grandkids. He seemed like the kind of grandpa who would tell really good stories." The innocence of Emma's observation made Rebecca's heart ache in the best possible way. Despite their financial struggles, despite the cramped apartment and second-hand everything, her daughter still saw the world as a place full of potential friends and interesting stories. Rebecca vowed to protect that optimism for as long as possible. Friday brought an unexpected challenge when Rebecca's Honda began making a grinding noise during her morning commute to the medical center. She'd learned to distinguish between the car's various mechanical complaints over the years: the wheezing that meant the air filter needed changing, the clicking that indicated low oil, the rumble that suggested the muffler was slowly giving up the ghost. But this grinding sound was new and ominous, accompanied by a vibration she could feel through the steering wheel. Rebecca pulled into the medical center's parking lot with her heart pounding, knowing that a major car repair could devastate their already precarious budget. She tried starting the engine again after her shift, and the Honda responded with a reluctant cough before falling silent. The grinding noise had evolved into something that sounded like metal scraping against metal, and she could smell burning. "Oil car trouble?" asked Janet Morrison, a fellow medical billing specialist who was walking to her own vehicle. Janet was in her 50s, a widow whose children had grown and moved away, leaving her with the kind of financial stability Rebecca could only dream about. She was kind but practical, the type of person who offered helpful advice while acknowledging the limitations of what she could actually do to help. "It's making some new and expensive sounds," Rebecca replied, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. "I'm hoping it's just something minor." Janet listened as Rebecca tried the engine again, wincing at the mechanical protest that echoed across the parking lot. "Honey, that doesn't sound minor. Do you have a mechanic you trust?" Rebecca almost laughed at the question. Trust wasn't the issue. Affordability was. The auto repair shop she'd used in the past was honest enough, but their estimates always seemed to assume she had money hidden away for emergencies. "I know a place," she said carefully. "I'll probably have to get it towed there tomorrow." "Listen," Janet said, rummaging through her purse. "My brother-in-law owns a garage on the west side. Good, honest work, and he's fair with pricing. Here's his card. Tell him I sent you. He might be able to work something out." Rebecca accepted the business card gratefully, though she suspected that even a fair price would be more than she could manage. The towing fee alone would probably eat up most of the money she'd set aside for Emma's school supplies. "Thank you, Janet. I really appreciate it." "We've all been there," Janet replied with understanding. "Cars always seem to break down at the worst possible moment. Do you need a ride somewhere?" Rebecca glanced at her watch. She had an hour before her evening shift at the diner, and the restaurant was only 3 miles away. In normal circumstances, she would have taken the bus, but the route would require 2 transfers and make her late for work. "Actually, if you're heading anywhere near 7th Street, I could really use a lift to the diner." "Of course, honey. Hop in." During the drive, Janet talked about her own single mother days 20 years earlier, when her husband had died in a construction accident and left her with 3 young children and a mountain of medical debt. "I worked 2 jobs for almost a decade," she said, navigating through the early evening traffic with practiced ease. "It felt like I was drowning most days, but somehow we made it through. The kids turned out fine. My youngest just graduated from college last month." Rebecca appreciated Janet's willingness to share her story, but she also felt the familiar weight of comparison. Janet's struggle had an end point, a clear resolution when her children became independent and her financial situation stabilized. Rebecca couldn't see that far ahead in her own life. Emma was only 6, which meant at least 12 more years of single parenthood, 12 more years of juggling multiple jobs and praying that nothing catastrophic would happen to derail their fragile stability. The diner was busy that evening, filled with construction workers grabbing dinner before their night shifts and travelers stopping for caffeine and comfort food. Rebecca threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction from her automotive worries. The rhythm of taking orders, delivering plates, and cleaning tables provided a kind of meditation, allowing her mind to process the day's stress while her body moved through familiar motions. Around 9 o'clock, during a brief lull in customers, Rebecca stepped outside for a 5-minute break. The parking lot was bathed in the orange glow of sodium streetlights, and she could see the distant mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky. Phoenix at night had a stark beauty that she'd learned to appreciate during her years of evening shifts, the way the desert air cooled just enough to be bearable, the vastness of the sky that made personal problems feel simultaneously overwhelming and insignificant. Her phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who sometimes watched Emma when Rebecca worked late. "Emma did her homework and had dinner. She's asking when you'll be home to read her a story." The message was followed by a photo of Emma in her pajamas, holding up a picture book about dragons and princesses. Rebecca typed back quickly, "Tell her I'll read 2 stories when I get home. Thank you so much for watching her." Mrs. Chen was a retired teacher who never accepted payment for watching Emma, insisting that she enjoyed the company and that neighbors should help neighbors. Rebecca had tried repeatedly to give her money or groceries in return, but Mrs. Chen always deflected with offers of homemade soup or help with Emma's math homework. The kindness of people like Mrs. Chen and Janet reminded Rebecca that she wasn't entirely alone in the world, even though it often felt that way. There were good people who offered help without expecting anything in return, people who understood that small gestures could make enormous differences in someone's day. The memory of Harold Whitfield fit into this category, an unexpected reminder that kindness flowed in all directions, that even someone struggling could be a source of comfort to others. As Rebecca finished her shift and waited for her taxi home, she found herself thinking about the interconnected nature of human kindness. She'd helped Harold cross a busy street, which had cost her $15 in late fees, but had given her something far more valuable, a renewed sense of purpose and connection. Janet had offered practical help with the car situation, Mrs. Chen provided reliable childcare, and Emma was learning that helping others was a source of joy rather than burden. The taxi ride home gave Rebecca time to plan her next steps. She would call Janet's brother-in-law first thing in the morning, explain her situation honestly, and hope that he could perform whatever mechanical miracle the Honda needed at a price she could somehow manage. If not, she would have to explore public transportation options and adjust her work schedule accordingly. She'd survived worse challenges than a broken-down car, and she would survive this one too, what she couldn't have known, as the taxi pulled up to her apartment complex and she climbed the stairs to her second-floor unit. Was that her simple act of kindness the previous Monday was about to intersect with her current crisis in a way that would change everything? Sometimes the universe has a way of rewarding good deeds in the most unexpected ways, and Rebecca Martinez was about to discover that helping a stranger cross the street had set in motion a chain of events that would transform her family's entire future. Saturday morning arrived with the oppressive weight of unresolved problems. Rebecca's Honda sat in the medical center parking lot like a monument to her mounting difficulties, and she knew that ignoring it wouldn't make the situation disappear. She'd arranged for Emma to spend the day with Mrs. Chen, who had planned a trip to the children's section of the public library, followed by a picnic in the park. Emma had been thrilled by the prospect, chattering excitedly about the new books she might discover, while Rebecca tried to mask her anxiety about the day ahead. The towing service arrived at 8:30 a.m. sharp, operated by a weathered man named Lou, who handled Rebecca's mechanical crisis with the casual efficiency of someone who'd rescued countless broken-down vehicles. "She's been good to you, hasn't she?" he asked, gesturing toward the Honda as he attached the tow chains. "These old Civics can run forever if you treat them right, but when they go, they really go." Rebecca rode in the passenger seat of the tow truck, watching her car's reflection in the side mirror as they navigated through Phoenix's Saturday morning traffic. Lou filled the silence with stories about his 30 years in the towing business, describing the dramatic breakdowns he'd witnessed and the creative ways people had tried to fix their vehicles with household items. His anecdotes were entertaining, but Rebecca found it difficult to concentrate on anything beyond the growing knot of worry in her stomach. Martinez Auto Repair occupied a corner lot on the west side of town, distinguished by a hand-painted sign that had faded to barely legible letters and a yard full of vehicles in various stages of resurrection. The garage itself was a sprawling building that looked like it had been constructed in sections over several decades, with corrugated metal additions and a small office that smelled of motor oil and industrial coffee. Tony Martinez, Janet's brother-in-law, emerged from beneath the hood of a pickup truck as they pulled into the lot. He was a man in his 60s with grease-stained coveralls and the kind of confident bearing that suggested he'd been solving automotive problems since before Rebecca was born. His handshake was firm but gentle, and his eyes held the patient wisdom of someone who'd seen every possible way a car could fail its owner. "Janet called me yesterday," Tony said as Lou positioned the Honda in the garage bay. "She mentioned you're having some trouble and that you're good people. Let me take a look at what we're dealing with here." Rebecca appreciated his straightforward approach, though she dreaded the diagnosis she suspected was coming. She watched as Tony connected diagnostic equipment to her car's computer system, his movements precise and practiced. The garage was organized chaos. Tools hung on pegboards, parts bins lined the walls, and half-completed vehicles occupied every available space. Despite the apparent disorder, Tony seemed to know exactly where everything belonged. "Well, the good news is that your engine is still fundamentally sound," Tony said after 20 minutes of examination. "The bad news is that your transmission is failing, and you need new brake pads all around. The grinding noise you've been hearing is metal on metal, which means you're driving on borrowed time." Rebecca felt her heart sink, even as she appreciated his honesty. "How much are we talking about?" Tony wiped his hands on a shop rag, considering his response carefully. "If this were anyone else walking in off the street, I'd be looking at around $1,200 for the transmission work, and another $300 for the brakes. But Janet told me you're a single mom, working multiple jobs, and I've got a policy about helping folks who are doing their best, but caught in a tough spot." He led her to his cluttered office, where manila folders competed for space with coffee-stained automotive manuals and photographs of classic cars. "I've got a rebuilt transmission that'll work in your Honda. It's not pretty, but it's reliable, and I can do the brake work for parts cost if you're willing to wait until next week, when my schedule opens up. All told, we're looking at about $600. $600. Rebecca tried to hide her reaction, but she knew her face had revealed everything. $600 was more than her monthly rent, more than she'd ever had in savings. At one time, more than she could borrow from anyone in her limited social circle. It might as well have been $6,000 or $6 million. "I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Martinez, I really do," Rebecca said quietly. "But I need to be honest. I don't have $600. I'm not sure when I would have $600. Tony nodded without judgment, as if this conversation was familiar territory. "Tell you what, I've got a proposition that might work for both of us. My office manager retired last month, and I've been drowning in paperwork ever since. Insurance, forms, customer billing, parts ordering, all the stuff that keeps me from doing what I actually know how to do. You work in medical billing, right? Same skill set, different industry." Rebecca felt a flicker of hope, but tried to keep her expectations realistic. "What are you suggesting?" "Work for me on weekends and evenings when you can spare the time. I'll pay you $15 an hour, which is above what most shops pay for office work, and I'll credit that against your car repair bill. At that rate, you'd need to work about 40 hours to cover the cost. Spread that over a month or two, and it becomes manageable." The offer was more generous than Rebecca had dared to hope for, but she could already see the complications it would create in her carefully balanced schedule. Weekend hours meant less time with Emma, and evening work would require additional childcare arrangements. But the alternative was having no car at all, which would make her current jobs impossible to maintain. "There's another part to this deal," Tony continued, seeming to read her hesitation. "Emma's welcome to hang out here while you work. I've got a comfortable break room with books and toys left behind by other employees' kids over the years. My granddaughter visits sometimes, and they might enjoy playing together." Rebecca felt tears threatening at the edges of her eyes. The kindness of strangers continued to surprise her, even as she'd come to expect nothing but obstacles and setbacks. "Mr. Martinez, I don't know what to say. That's incredibly generous." "Tony, please. And it's not generosity. It's good business. I need the help, you need the work, and your car needs fixing. Sometimes the best solutions are the ones that help everyone involved." They shook hands on the arrangement, and Tony promised to have her car roadworthy enough to drive home by Tuesday evening. Rebecca took the bus back to her apartment, a journey that required 2 transfers and consumed most of her afternoon. But she felt lighter than she had in weeks. The car crisis that had seemed insurmountable that morning now had a path forward, and she'd gained a part-time job that might provide some breathing room in her perpetually tight budget. Emma was bubbling with excitement when Mrs. Chen brought her home that evening, her arms full of library books and her cheeks flushed from their park adventure. "Mommy, Mrs. Chen taught me how to identify different types of clouds, and we saw a roadrunner in the desert garden. Did you know they can run 18 miles per hour? Rebecca hugged her daughter tightly, breathing in the scent of sunshine and childhood that clung to Emma's hair. "I did not know that, sweetheart. It sounds like you had an amazing day. Mrs. Chen said we might see more roadrunners next weekend if we go early in the morning. Can we do that, Mommy? Can we go on an early morning adventure?" "We'll see, baby," Rebecca replied, though she was already mentally rearranging her schedule to accommodate both Tony's office work and Emma's growing interest in desert wildlife. "Speaking of adventures, we might be having some new experiences ourselves. I met a very nice man today who needs help with his business, and he's going to help fix our car in exchange." Emma's eyes widened with interest. "Like a trade. Mrs. Chen told me about how people used to trade things instead of using money. She said her grandmother traded vegetables from her garden for fabric to make clothes." "Exactly like that," Rebecca confirmed, marveling once again at her daughter's ability to grasp complex concepts and connect them to larger ideas. "Sometimes helping each other is more valuable than money." As they prepared dinner together, Emma standing on a step stool to help wash vegetables while Rebecca heated a can of soup. Rebecca reflected on how dramatically her perspective had shifted since helping Harold Whitfield cross the street. That simple act of kindness had reminded her that generosity was contagious, that people like Janet and Tony and Mrs. Chen were looking for ways to help if she was brave enough to accept their assistance. Sunday passed quietly, with Rebecca using her unexpected free time to catch up on laundry, help Emma with a reading assignment, and plan her strategy for balancing her multiple jobs with her new commitment to Tony's garage. She called the diner to request a slight adjustment in her schedule, explaining that she'd found additional work that wouldn't conflict with her evening shifts. Her manager, Carlos, was accommodating. Good waitresses were hard to find, and Rebecca had never missed a shift or caused problems with customers. Monday morning brought a return to her regular routine at the medical center, though Rebecca found herself looking forward to Tuesday evening when she could retrieve her car and begin her new arrangement with Tony. The irony wasn't lost on her that a mechanical breakdown had led to what felt like the first genuinely positive development in her life since Emma was born. Sometimes disasters created opportunities that wouldn't have existed otherwise. What Rebecca couldn't have known, as she processed insurance claims and answered phones in her windowless office, was that her act of kindness the previous week had created ripples that extended far beyond her own life. Harold Whitfield had mentioned her assistance to several people, including his attorney, who had made note of the encounter in ways that would soon prove significant. The universe has a peculiar sense of timing, and sometimes good deeds create chain reactions that take time to reach their intended destinations. Rebecca Martinez was about to discover that helping a stranger cross a busy street had initiated a sequence of events that would transform not just her immediate circumstances, but her family's entire future in ways she could never have imagined. Tuesday evening couldn't arrive fast enough for Rebecca. She'd spent the day fielding questions from co-workers about her temporary reliance on public transportation, explaining the situation with practiced cheerfulness while internally counting the hours, until she could reclaim her independence. The bus system had proven more reliable than she'd expected, but the additional travel time meant leaving Emma with Mrs. Chen for longer periods, and arriving home exhausted from the physical demands of multiple transfers and long walks in the desert heat. Tony had called that afternoon to confirm her Honda was ready, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a job well done. "She's running smoother than she has in years," he'd reported. "The new transmission is a perfect match, and I replaced those brake pads with some premium ones I had in stock. You'll feel the difference immediately." Emma insisted on accompanying Rebecca to retrieve the car, turning the evening into an adventure rather than a chore. Mrs. Chen offered to drive them to the garage, grateful for an excuse to explore a part of the city she rarely visited. The three of them crowded into Mrs. Chen's immaculate sedan, with Emma chattering about the different types of buildings they passed, and Mrs. Chen sharing stories about how the neighborhoods had changed during her 40 years in Phoenix. Martinez. Auto repair looked different in the early evening light, with the harsh Arizona sun softened by approaching dusk and the garage bays glowing with warm yellow light. Tony emerged from his office as they pulled into the lot, wiping his hands on a clean shop rag and wearing the pleased expression of someone who'd solved a particularly challenging puzzle. "There she is," he said, gesturing toward Rebecca's Honda, which sat in the customer parking area looking modest but reliable. "I took her for a test drive this afternoon, and she handles like a different car. The previous owner really took care of the engine, which is why that transmission lasted as long as it did." Rebecca ran her hand along the Honda's faded paint, feeling an unexpected surge of affection for the vehicle that had carried her and Emma through 3 years of challenges. The car started immediately when she turned the key, the engine responding with a quiet purr that was dramatically different from the mechanical protests she'd grown accustomed to hearing. "Mr. Martinez, Tony, I can't thank you enough," Rebecca said, as Emma explored the garage's break room, marveling at the collection of automotive magazines and vintage tools displayed on the walls. "When can I start helping with your office work?" Tony handed her a folder containing receipts and invoices that needed to be organized and entered into his computer system. "How about Thursday evening? I'll stay late to show you the filing system and introduce you to my billing software. It's pretty straightforward once you get the hang of it, and I suspect you'll pick it up faster than I did." The drive home felt like a celebration, with Emma announcing to anyone who would listen that their car was completely fixed and better than new. Mrs. Chen followed them back to their apartment complex, and the three of them sat on Rebecca's small balcony, sharing iced tea and watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. "It's funny how problems sometimes turn into opportunities," Mrs. Chen observed, her teacher's wisdom evident in the way she helped Emma identify the different rock formations visible in the evening light. "When my husband passed away 10 years ago, I thought I'd never find purpose again, but volunteering at the community center and helping neighbors like you has given me more joy than I expected." Rebecca squeezed her neighbor's hand, recognizing the mutual benefit in their friendship. Mrs. Chen needed to feel useful and connected, while Rebecca and Emma needed the stability and wisdom that an extended family might provide. These organic relationships had become the foundation of their small community, proving that support systems could develop naturally when people remained open to helping each other. Thursday evening at the garage introduced Rebecca to a completely different side of Tony's business. During the day, the focus was entirely mechanical, diagnosing problems, ordering parts, and restoring vehicles to working condition. But the administrative side revealed the complexity of running a small business in a competitive industry. Insurance, claims, vendor negotiations, customer payment plans, and regulatory compliance created a mountain of paperwork that Tony had been managing haphazardly since his office manager's retirement. "I'm much better with wrenches than I am with spreadsheets," Tony admitted, as he showed Rebecca his filing system, which was more archaeological dig than organizational structure. "My wife used to handle all this before she passed away 3 Years ago, she had a gift for keeping everything organized and making sure I actually got paid for the work I was doing. Rebecca spent 2 hours that evening creating a basic system for tracking outstanding invoices and organizing customer files by date, rather than the semi-random method Tony had been employing. The work was satisfying in a different way than her medical center job. Instead of processing endless insurance claims for a large corporation, she was helping a small business owner who genuinely appreciated her efforts and treated her like a valued team member rather than a replaceable cog. Emma entertained herself in the break room, reading books Mrs. Chen had helped her select from the library and drawing pictures of the various cars she could see through the window. She seemed fascinated by the garage environment, asking thoughtful questions about how engines worked and why different vehicles required different types of maintenance. Tony answered her questions with the same patience he showed his adult customers, explaining complex mechanical concepts in terms a 6-year-old could understand. "Your daughter's got a curious mind," Tony told Rebecca as they wrapped up the evening's work. "She asked me why some cars need different kinds of oil, and I found myself giving her a 20-minute explanation of viscosity and temperature ranges. She understood more than some of my apprentices." Rebecca felt a familiar surge of pride mixed with concern. Emma's intelligence was obvious, but Rebecca worried about providing adequate intellectual stimulation with their limited resources. The public school Emma would attend in the fall was overcrowded and underfunded, and Rebecca couldn't afford the enrichment activities that might challenge her daughter's growing curiosity about the world. "She's always been like that," Rebecca replied, watching Emma carefully stack her drawings and books in preparation for departure. "Sometimes I think she's smarter than I am. I just hope I can give her the opportunities she deserves." "Smart kids find their way," Tony said with conviction, "especially when they've got parents who care as much as you do. The fancy schools and expensive programs don't matter as much as having someone who encourages questions and celebrates learning." The weekend brought their first real test of Rebecca's expanded schedule. Saturday morning meant her usual house-cleaning jobs, but she'd arranged to spend Saturday afternoon at the garage while Emma played with Tony's granddaughter Maria, who was visiting for the weekend. The two girls hit it off immediately, building elaborate cities out of cardboard boxes and spare automotive parts, while Rebecca organized customer files and updated billing records. Sunday afternoon, Rebecca tackled a stack of insurance paperwork that Tony had been avoiding for weeks. The work was similar to her medical center job, but more immediate in its impact. Each resolved claim meant Tony could pay his suppliers and keep his business running smoothly. She found herself genuinely invested in the garage's success, understanding that her contribution was making a measurable difference in Tony's ability to help other customers facing automotive crises. As August melted into September, Rebecca's new routine began to feel natural rather than overwhelming. The additional income from her garage work provided breathing room in her budget for the first time since Emma was born. She could buy name-brand groceries without calculating every penny, replace Emma's worn-out sneakers before they developed holes, and even contribute $20 to her daughter's school supply fund without sacrificing necessities. More importantly, the work had expanded her sense of community beyond the narrow confines of survival. Tony treated her as a trusted colleague, asking for her input on business decisions and praising her organizational improvements. Emma was thriving in the garage environment, developing friendships with other employees' children and learning practical skills that no classroom could provide. Even Mrs. Chen had become part of their extended garage family, occasionally stopping by with homemade cookies and staying to chat with Tony about their shared experiences as business owners. Rebecca's confidence was growing in ways she hadn't experienced since before her marriage fell apart. The combination of steady work, reliable childcare, and genuine appreciation for her contributions was rebuilding her sense of self-worth. She found herself making eye contact with strangers again, smiling at cashiers, and engaging in casual conversations with other parents at Emma's school events. What Rebecca didn't know, as she settled into this new rhythm of work and community, was that her life was about to change in ways that would dwarf even these positive developments. A week and a half after helping Harold Whitfield cross that busy downtown intersection, her simple act of kindness was about to come full circle in the most unexpected way imaginable. Sometimes the universe takes time to balance its books, but when it does, the accounting can be breathtaking in its precision and generosity. Wednesday morning arrived with the crisp promise of autumn that Phoenix residents treasured after months of oppressive heat. Rebecca was enjoying her first cup of coffee on the balcony, watching Emma practice reading aloud from a picture book about desert animals, when her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. The caller identified himself as Dr. Kenneth Ashford from Phoenix Children's Hospital, and Rebecca's heart immediately leaped to her throat with the panic that every parent knows, the fear that something terrible had happened to their child. "Miss Martinez, please don't be alarmed," Dr. Ashford said quickly, seeming to sense her anxiety. "Emma is perfectly fine. I'm calling about something completely different. I understand you helped an elderly gentleman named Harold Whitfield cross the street downtown about 10 days ago." Rebecca's racing pulse slowed slightly, though confusion replaced panic. "Yes, I did. Is Mr. Whitfield okay? Did something happen to him?" "Mr. Whitfield is fine, though he's currently a patient here for a scheduled procedure. He specifically asked me to contact you, and I have to say, what he's told me about your kindness has made quite an impression on our staff. Would it be possible for you to visit him this afternoon? He has something important he'd like to discuss with you." The request was so unexpected that Rebecca found herself agreeing before she'd fully processed what was being asked. Dr. Ashford provided Harold's room number and visiting hours, explaining that the elderly man had been adamant about speaking with her personally. After hanging up, Rebecca sat in bewildered silence, trying to understand why someone she'd helped for 5 minutes would specifically request her presence in a hospital. Emma looked up from her book with the uncanny intuition that children possess. "Mommy, you look confused. Was that about the nice man you helped?" "Yes, sweetheart. He's in the hospital and he wants to see us. I'm not sure why, but sometimes when people are sick, they like to thank the people who were kind to them. Can we bring him flowers? Mrs. Chen says flowers make sick people feel better." Rebecca's heart swelled with pride at her daughter's compassionate instinct. "That's a wonderful idea, Emma. We'll stop at the grocery store and pick out something cheerful." The afternoon found them navigating the maze-like corridors of Phoenix Children's Hospital, following color-coded signs toward the adult wing, where Harold was recovering from what the nurses described as minor cardiac maintenance. Rebecca carried a small bouquet of sunflowers that Emma had selected, while Emma clutched a get-well card she'd made featuring a drawing of a smiling sun and the carefully printed words, "Get better soon, Mr. Whitfield." Harold's room was private and filled with afternoon sunlight streaming through large windows that overlooked the hospital's healing garden. The elderly man looked smaller in the hospital bed than he had standing at that busy intersection, but his eyes brightened with genuine pleasure when he saw Rebecca and Emma enter. "My dear Rebecca," he said, his voice slightly hoarse but warm with affection, "and this must be Emma. I've heard so much about you from your mother." Emma approached the bed with the fearless curiosity of childhood, studying the various monitors and medical equipment with fascination rather than apprehension. "Are you feeling better, Mr. Whitfield? Mommy said you were sick, but you don't look very sick to me." Harold chuckled, a sound that seemed to come from deep in his chest. "I'm feeling much better, thank you for asking. The doctors here are taking excellent care of me, and seeing you both has improved my spirits considerably." Rebecca placed the sunflowers in a water pitcher that a nurse had provided, arranging them so Harold could see them from his bed. "Dr. Ashford said you wanted to speak with me, but honestly, I'm not sure why. What I did was such a small thing." "Small. Things often have the biggest impact," Harold replied, his expression growing serious. "Please, both of you, sit down. I have something important to tell you, and I'm not entirely sure how to begin." Emma settled into the visitor's chair, with her legs swinging freely, while Rebecca perched on the edge of the seat beside the bed. The afternoon light cast long shadows across the room, creating an atmosphere of intimacy that seemed appropriate for whatever conversation was about to unfold. "Rebecca, when you helped me cross that street, you probably thought you were simply assisting an old man who was moving too slowly for modern traffic patterns. But what you couldn't have known is that I was on my way to what I believed would be the most important meeting of my life. I was terrified that I would be late, that I would miss my opportunity to finalize arrangements that had taken months to coordinate." Harold paused to take a sip of water from the cup beside his bed, his hands trembling slightly with either medication effects or emotion. "You see, I've spent the past year liquidating my assets and making arrangements for my estate. I'm 81 years old, my health is declining, and I have no immediate family to inherit what I've spent a lifetime accumulating. My wife passed away 15 years ago, and we never had children. My siblings are all gone, and my extended family lives overseas, with no connection to my life here in America." Rebecca felt increasingly confused about why this personal information was being shared with her, a virtual stranger who had provided 5 minutes of assistance. Emma listened with the absorbed attention she gave to all adult conversations, processing information that was clearly beyond her understanding, but sensing its importance. That afternoon, I was meeting with my attorney to finalize the establishment of a charitable foundation that will distribute my estate to worthy causes after my death. The process had been incredibly complex, involving lawyers, financial advisors, and tax specialists. I'd been working on it for months, and this particular appointment was crucial for completing the legal paperwork before certain filing deadlines. Harold's eyes focused directly on Rebecca, and she could see tears beginning to form. "When you took my arm and walked with me across that busy street, you weren't just helping an old man get to his destination safely. You were ensuring that millions of dollars would be properly distributed to help people who need it most. If I had missed that appointment, the legal complications would have delayed the foundation's establishment by at least 6 months, possibly longer. Mr. Whitfield, I'm glad I could help, but please let me finish," Harold interrupted gently. "During that meeting, I told my attorney about your kindness. I described how you sacrificed your own urgent schedule to help a stranger, how you treated me with dignity and respect, how you embodied exactly the kind of values I wanted my foundation to support. That conversation led to a series of discussions among my legal team about individuals who demonstrate exceptional character in their daily lives." Harold reached for a manila envelope on his bedside table, his movements careful but determined. "Rebecca, the Harold Whitfield Foundation will begin operations next month with an initial endowment of $12 million. The foundation's mission is to identify and support individuals who consistently demonstrate kindness, integrity, and resilience in the face of personal challenges." Rebecca's world seemed to tilt slightly as she processed what Harold was saying. Emma had stopped swinging her legs and was watching the adults with rapt attention, sensing that something momentous was occurring even if she couldn't understand the specific details. "Our first recipient has already been selected," Harold continued, removing several documents from the envelope. "The Foundation's Board of Directors unanimously agreed that Rebecca Martinez represents exactly the kind of person we want to support. You're a single mother working multiple jobs to provide for your daughter while maintaining your integrity and compassion toward others. You help strangers even when it costs you personally. You're raising a child who already shows the same values of kindness and curiosity that make the world better. Harold handed Rebecca a document that she recognized as a cashier's check, though the amount printed on it seemed impossible to comprehend. This is the first distribution from the Harold Whitfield Foundation, $50,000 to help you and Emma build the life you deserve. Rebecca stared at the check, her hands trembling as she tried to process the magnitude of what was happening. $50,000 was more money than she'd ever imagined having at one time. It was enough to pay off her debts, create a college, fund for Emma, maybe even make a down payment on a small house. It was enough to transform their lives completely. Mr. Whitfield, I can't accept this. It's too much. What I did, helping you across the street, wasn't charity work or community service. That was just being human. Exactly, Harold said with satisfaction. That's precisely why you're the perfect recipient. You don't think of kindness as something extraordinary that deserves recognition. You think of it as simply being human. That perspective is rarer than you might imagine, and it's exactly what this foundation wants to encourage and support. Emma had climbed down from her chair and approached Harold's bed, studying his face with the serious expression she wore when trying to understand complex adult emotions. Mr. Whitfield, does this mean Mommy doesn't have to work so many jobs anymore? Harold smiled at her directness. It means your mother will have choices she didn't have before, Emma. She can decide what kind of work makes her happiest, where you both want to live, and what dreams you want to pursue together. Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face as the reality of their changed circumstances began to sink in. For 3 years, every decision had been driven by financial necessity, every choice constrained by the limitations of poverty. Now suddenly, a world of possibilities was opening before them, all because she'd helped an elderly man cross a busy street on a sweltering August afternoon. The drive home from Phoenix Children's Hospital passed in a surreal haze, with Rebecca gripping the steering wheel of her newly repaired Honda while her mind struggled to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. The cashier's check sat in her purse like a talisman, its presence both thrilling and terrifying. In equal measure, Emma chattered excitedly from the back seat about Harold's room, the kind nurses, and the really big number on the piece of paper that had made her mother cry happy tears. "Mommy, can we call Mrs. Chen and tell her about the nice surprise?" Emma asked as they pulled into their apartment complex. She likes surprises, and this is the biggest one ever. Rebecca parked in their usual spot and turned to face her daughter, seeing her own wonder reflected in Emma's bright eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, we'll definitely share this news with Mrs. Chen. But first, let's go inside and really talk about what this means for us." Their small apartment looked exactly the same as when they'd left it that morning, but everything felt different. The cramped kitchen, the second-hand furniture, the water stains on the ceiling, none of these things had changed, yet Rebecca saw them through completely altered eyes. For the first time in 3 years, their living situation was a choice rather than a necessity. They could stay and appreciate what they had, or they could explore other possibilities without the desperate urgency that had driven every previous decision. Rebecca made hot chocolate while Emma arranged her crayons on the coffee table, preparing to draw a picture of their hospital visit. The familiar ritual of preparing her daughter's favorite drink helped ground Rebecca in the present moment, even as her thoughts raced toward an uncertain but suddenly bright future. "Emma, do you understand what happened today?" Rebecca asked, settling beside her daughter on their faded floral couch. Emma considered the question with the gravity she brought to all important topics. "Mr. Whitfield gave us money because you helped him when he needed help, and now we can help other people too, right?" The simplicity of Emma's understanding cut straight to the heart of what had occurred. Rebecca pulled her daughter close, marveling at how naturally a 6-year-old could grasp concepts that felt overwhelming to adult minds. "That's exactly right, sweetheart. Mr. Whitfield wanted to make sure that kind people get help when they need it. Like how Tony helped fix our car, and Mrs. Chen helped watch me, and Janet gave you the card for Tony's garage. Yes, just like that. It's all connected, Emma. When we help each other, good things happen in ways we can't always predict." Rebecca spent the evening making lists, not the desperate calculations of expenses and necessities that had filled countless notebooks over the past 3 years, but hopeful inventories of possibilities and dreams. She could reduce her work schedule and spend more time with Emma. She could enroll in classes to advance her career. They could move to a larger apartment, maybe even a small house, with a yard where Emma could play safely. She could establish a college fund that would ensure Emma's brilliant mind would never be limited by financial constraints. But perhaps most importantly, she could continue the cycle of kindness that had brought them to this moment. Rebecca found herself thinking about other single parents in situations similar to her own, wondering how she might use this unexpected gift to create opportunities for families who were struggling the way she had struggled. Thursday morning brought the challenge of maintaining normalcy while processing extraordinary circumstances. Rebecca arrived at the medical center at her usual time, but found it difficult to concentrate on insurance claims and billing codes when her thoughts kept drifting to the check in her purse and the conversations she needed to have about reshaping her life. Janet noticed her distraction during their coffee break, commenting on Rebecca's unusual cheerfulness with the observational skills of someone who'd navigated her own share of life's surprises. "You look like someone who just won the lottery," she observed with a knowing smile. "Did something good happen?" Rebecca hesitated, unsure how to explain the incredible chain of events that had led from a simple act of kindness to a life-changing gift. "Remember that elderly man I helped cross the street a couple of weeks ago? It turns out that small gesture had bigger consequences than I ever imagined." She shared the basic outline of Harold's story, watching Janet's expression evolve from polite interest to amazement as the full scope of the situation became clear. Janet had enough life experience to understand both the rarity of such generosity and the profound responsibility it represented. "Rebecca, that's absolutely incredible," Janet said, reaching across the break-room table to squeeze her friend's hand. "But I have to ask, what are you going to do with this opportunity? $50,000 is a blessing, but it's also a test of character." The question had been weighing on Rebecca's mind since leaving the hospital. She'd grown up hearing stories about lottery winners who'd squandered their windfalls and ended up worse off than before. She understood that money without wisdom was often destructive, and she was determined to honor Harold's faith in her by making choices that would create lasting positive change. "I'm going to be very careful and very deliberate," Rebecca replied. "First, I want to pay off the debts from my divorce and create some financial stability. Then I want to invest in Emma's future. Education, experiences, opportunities I never could have provided before. But I also want to find ways to help other people the way Harold helped me." Janet nodded approvingly. "That sounds like the Rebecca I know, always thinking about others even when good things happen to her. Have you considered talking to a financial advisor? Someone who can help you make this money work for you long-term, rather than just spending it on immediate needs." The suggestion was practical and valuable, representing the kind of forward-thinking planning that Rebecca had never been able to afford before. She made a mental note to research financial advisors, adding it to her growing list of responsible steps for managing this unexpected windfall. That evening at Tony's garage, Rebecca found herself working with renewed energy and focus. The administrative tasks that had once felt like necessary drudgery now seemed like meaningful contributions to a business that had become part of her extended family. Tony noticed her improved mood immediately, commenting on her efficiency and enthusiasm as she organized customer files and updated billing records. "You seem different tonight," Tony observed, as Emma played contentedly in the break room, with a puzzle that one of his employees had brought for his own children. "More relaxed, maybe, like a weight's been lifted off your shoulders." Rebecca considered how much to share about her changed circumstances. Tony had been incredibly generous with his work for repair arrangement, and she felt he deserved honesty about her situation. "Something unexpected happened that's going to make life easier for Emma and me. I wanted you to know that even though I don't need this job for financial survival anymore, I'd like to keep working here if you'll have me. I've come to value being part of this community." Tony's weathered face broke into a wide grin. "Rebecca, you've become family here. The business runs smoother with your help, and Emma's brought more joy to this old garage than I've felt in years. Whatever good fortune has come your way, you've earned it through hard work and kindness. We'd be honored to have you continue working with us for as long as you want." The conversation reinforced Rebecca's growing understanding that true wealth came not just from financial security, but from the relationships and community connections that provided meaning and support. The money from Harold's foundation would solve her immediate problems, but it was the human connections she'd built with Tony, Janet, Mrs. Chen, and even Harold himself that would sustain her family's happiness in the long term. Friday brought a visit from Harold himself, who had been discharged from the hospital and wanted to see how Rebecca and Emma were processing their new circumstances. He arrived at their apartment in the late afternoon, carrying a small gift bag and wearing the same dignified bearing that had first caught Rebecca's attention at that busy intersection. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," Harold said, as Rebecca welcomed him inside. "I wanted to check on you both and perhaps share some thoughts about managing the responsibilities that come with unexpected good fortune." Emma greeted Harold like an old friend, showing him her drawing of their hospital visit and explaining the various desert animals depicted in her favorite picture books. Harold listened with the patient attention of someone who genuinely enjoyed children's perspectives, asking thoughtful questions that encouraged Emma to elaborate on her interests and observations. Over tea and cookies that Mrs. Chen had contributed to the occasion, Harold shared stories about his own life and the experiences that had led him to establish his foundation. He'd grown up during the Great Depression, learning early that kindness and community support were often the difference between survival and despair. His business success had come through hard work and ethical practices, but he'd never forgotten the people who'd helped him along the way. "Wealth is a tool," Harold explained, as Emma listened with fascination to his stories about building his company from a single delivery truck into a regional transportation empire. "Used wisely, it can create opportunities and solve problems. Used carelessly, it can become a burden that isolates you from the very community connections that make life meaningful." He pulled several documents from his briefcase, explaining that he'd taken the liberty of researching financial advisors and educational consultants who specialized in helping families navigate sudden changes in circumstances. "I don't want to presume to direct your choices," he said carefully, "but I've learned that having good advisors makes an enormous difference in achieving positive outcomes." Rebecca accepted the information gratefully, recognizing that Harold's guidance came from genuine concern for her family's well-being rather than any desire to control their decisions. His approach reminded her of the way Tony had offered his car repair arrangement, as a partnership that benefited everyone involved rather than charity that created dependency. The conversation naturally turned to Rebecca's plans for the future. and she found herself articulating dreams that had seemed impossible just days earlier. She wanted to reduce her work schedule and spend more time with Emma. She hoped to pursue additional education that would qualify her for more challenging and better-paying career opportunities. She dreamed of buying a small house where Emma could have her own room and a yard for playing. All of those goals are achievable with careful planning, Harold assured her. But I'd like to suggest one additional consideration. The foundation will be making regular distributions to worthy recipients, and we'll need people to help identify individuals and families who could benefit from support. Your experience with financial hardship, combined with your natural compassion and practical wisdom, would make you an ideal candidate for our selection committee. The offer was unexpected, but felt like a natural extension of the circle of kindness that had brought them together. Rebecca could envision herself helping to identify other single parents, struggling students, or community members who demonstrated the same resilience and integrity that had caught Harold's attention. "I'd be honored to help with that work," Rebecca replied. "It feels like the right way to honor the gift you've given us by helping others receive similar opportunities." As autumn deepened into winter, Rebecca's life settled into new rhythms that balanced stability with purposeful change. She reduced her hours at the medical center and the diner, using the extra time to take business courses at the community college and spend more focused attention on Emma's education. They moved to a small rental house in a quiet neighborhood with good schools, where Emma could walk to classes and play safely in their fenced backyard. Emma flourished in her new environment, making friends easily and excelling academically in ways that confirmed Rebecca's long-held belief in her daughter's exceptional potential. She joined the school's science club and began taking piano lessons, pursuits that had been financially impossible in their previous circumstances, but now represented investments in her developing talents and interests. Rebecca continued working at Tony's garage on weekends, not from financial necessity, but from genuine enjoyment of the work and appreciation for the community she'd found there. She also began volunteering with Harold's Foundation, reviewing applications and interviewing potential recipients. The work was deeply satisfying, allowing her to channel her own experiences with hardship into opportunities for others to overcome similar challenges. 6 months after that sweltering August afternoon when she'd helped an elderly man cross a busy street, Rebecca found herself reflecting on the interconnected nature of human kindness and the unpredictable ways that simple gestures could transform lives. She thought about the ripple effects that continued to spread outward, the families helped by Harold's Foundation, the students encouraged by her own example, the community connections that grew stronger through mutual support and shared purpose. Emma, now 7 and increasingly wise in the way that children who've witnessed their parents' struggles often become, understood that their good fortune came with responsibilities. She helped Rebecca sort through foundation applications, offering innocent observations that sometimes revealed important truths about candidates' character and circumstances. She volunteered at community events, approaching service with the natural enthusiasm that made helping others feel like play rather than obligation. On a warm spring evening, as Rebecca tucked Emma into bed in their new house, her daughter asked a question that captured the essence of everything they'd learned together. "Mommy, do you think Mr. Whitfield knew that helping him would help so many other people too?" Rebecca considered the question, thinking about Harold's wisdom and the deliberate way he'd structured his foundation to create ongoing cycles of support and kindness. "I think he hoped it would, sweetheart. I think he understood that when good people help each other, kindness keeps growing and spreading to more and more people. Like how you helping him helped us, and now we help other families, and they'll probably help people too." "Exactly like that, Emma. It's like throwing a stone into a still pond. The ripples keep spreading out farther and farther until you can't see where they end. As Rebecca turned off Emma's bedroom light and settled into her own evening routine, she marveled at how dramatically their lives had changed while the core values that guided their choices remained constant. They still believed in helping others, still appreciated the importance of community and connection, still understood that true wealth came from relationships and purpose rather than bank account balances. The difference was that now they had the resources and opportunities to act on those values in ways that created lasting positive change for themselves and others. Rebecca's simple decision to help an elderly man cross a busy street had initiated a chain of events that would continue to benefit countless families for generations to come, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can have the most profound and far-reaching consequences. In the quiet moments before sleep, Rebecca often thought about that August afternoon and the choice she'd made to prioritize compassion over convenience. She'd been running late, worried about money, stressed about the countless responsibilities that filled her days. But when she saw someone who needed help, she'd acted without calculating the cost or considering the consequences. That choice had changed everything, not because she'd expected or hoped for any reward, but because genuine kindness, offered freely and without conditions, has a power that transcends the immediate circumstances that inspire it. Harold Whitfield had recognized something in Rebecca's character that she'd never seen in herself, and his foundation had provided the means for her family to build a life of purpose and possibility. The story that had begun with a struggling single mother helping a stranger cross a busy street had evolved into something far larger and more meaningful, a testament to the transformative power of human kindness and the beautiful unpredictability of lives lived with compassion and integrity. And in the quiet suburb where Rebecca and Emma now made their home, surrounded by friends and community and endless opportunities for growth and service, the ripples of that first simple act of kindness continued to spread outward, touching lives in ways that would never be fully measured or completely understood. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.